Okay. So I think we can talk about the bodhisattva path more now. So keep remembering the different levels of practices and the implication of each one. So this first level, the very first level, like I say, junior school, or the lowest scope as they call it, the very minimum requirement, the very minimum level of practice there is given that, you know, we don't want further suffering, and we're talking about the grosser level of suffering, which, okay, means lower realms, but you don't want to think about that. We all know about the suffering of being harmed, being hurt, not believed in, being bad things happening to us. So that the logical, the view for the Buddha is that's the result of having harmed others. So the very minimum level of practice at junior school is merely stop harming others. I mean, you couldn't wish for better than that. So that's where you get at least, you know, when you die, you've got virtuous karmic imprints, you've refrained from killing, refrained from lying, refrained from stealing, even living in the vows, and doing some purification every day. You have got a perfect practice, honestly. It's logical in this framework. So then you can die with a happy mind and get at least another, more of the same, another decent human rebirth with good conditions, with no intention to kill, no intention to lie. That's the miracle, you know. You purify your mind and then you keep moving on your spiritual path. It's very logical, very reasonable. So next level, you can go further. It's still for your benefit. It's still the wisdom wing. It's still for your benefit. You now get to the root of the problem, which is the delusions. And you want to rip them out. You lessen attachment, lessen all the neuroses. And then the result of that, you know, it sounds like giving up things all the time. Sounds very depressing. Giving up killing, giving up lying, giving up this, giving up that, giving up anger. It feels like you end up with nothing. But what we don't realize, what that means is you end up becoming more content, more fulfilled, more wise, more joyful. This is literally the truth psychologically. When you hear that, it's kind of uplifting. It's not just giving up something, being miserable, being renounced, you know. It means becoming happy, becoming joyful. Then, that's the emphasis. So the emphasis of that level is refraining from harming, controlling your body, speech and mind, discipline, growing up, and then becoming a more fulfilled person. And the vows in relation to that are called the vows of individual liberation. If you completed the job there, you'd then realize emptiness and you'd get the hell out of here and you wouldn't come back. So the vows there, the level of vows are very kind of, there's no wiggle room. You just don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, don't harm. It's very strict and necessary discipline. Now you're prepared to go to the next level where you enter into the bodhisattva path, and here you take eventually the vows of the bodhisattva, and they're way more powerful, way more amazing, and their emphasis is completely different. They're still about behavior. They're all about controlling your behavior, but the emphasis in the first one is don't harm others for your own sake. Here, it's to benefit others for their sake, to act in a certain way that's for the benefit of others. And clearly, if we haven't got much wisdom and haven't got much self-respect and we're miserable in like the victim mode, you can't see past your own nose. You haven't got a clue how to help anybody. But when you lessen attachment and lessen neurosis, your mind expands and you can see others more clearly, and now you know what's beneficial for them. It's a powerful shift, you know. So often, you know, spiritual paths, people think about it's about love and compassion, and it absolutely is. But your love and compassion is useless if it's not based on wisdom. And wisdom is what you get when you lessen neuroses, lessen ego, lessen fears and your own self-centered dramas. It's much more powerful. As His Holiness says, compassion is not enough. You need wisdom, and that's the hard job of disciplining your body, speech and mind. That's the wisdom wing, and you're the beneficiary of that. Now we expand our mind to begin to encompass others. The job doesn't change. You continue working in your mind. That never stops until you become enlightened. But the reasoning for it, the emphasis is because for the sake of others. So when we've got a lot of compassion and a good heart, which is very common, but not much wisdom, you're a disaster. That's when you become a doormat. That's when your compassion is completely polluted by attachment, and that's a mess. You make a mess. That's the only way we understand compassion. We don't have a view in our culture of lessening attachment and neuroses. We don't talk like that. So we can have lots of compassion, lots of good heart, but when it's polluted by your attachment, that drags you down to hell and it makes you depressed or angry, and you're confused and can't cope. Or you've got, you know, you try to help your beloved, you try to help your alcoholic brother or your dear daughter, but because you're so confused in your own rubbish, you can't see past your own nose, and you see them through your lenses, so you make a mess half the time thinking you're helping them, but it's coming from your own neurosis. There is some compassion there, but there's no wisdom. So it's so important to see the relationship of these two different approaches, you know. And then in other words, wisdom, what wisdom brings, which is your contentment, it also brings strength and courage and brings iron to your compassion, not just weak compassion, not just idiot compassion. It brings great strength to your compassion. It's compassion mixed with wisdom. It's genuinely what's the best for the other. And that means you're able to make the tough choices. When we've got lots of attachment, we're so weak. We'll just do anything that the person wants, thinking it's called love. It's not. Especially mothers, you know. Mothers are a disaster. You understand? I know my mother. It was so vividly clear, you know. She had enormous love and compassion for the 7 of us. But completely you could see her attachment. I mean, you know, because I was a mess as a kid. And she's always protecting me from being in trouble. She'd always protect me. She'd always lift me up. She felt guilty because the family was neurotic and my daddy wasn't so useful. But she's always overcompensating all the time. And I knew I'd be furious about it because I felt that she was insulting me in a way. But she always thought it was called love. So I remember one time, it was so clear, I was lazy, I didn't do my homework. And she wrote a poem for me. And I didn't know the meaning of a word. And the teacher asked me, and it was clear I hadn't written it. But she thought it was helping me. She didn't help me at all. That's foolish compassion. But that's what mummies do, isn't it? I remember when we had a printing company. My father was a journalist. He started this company, like, you know, publishing and business, printing, and we all worked there at some point. I said, all my life's always been about publishing. It was like my first apprenticeship, really. I remember I made a mess of a certain job I did, the typesetting. I made a real mess. And the client came and complained. My mother refused to accept that I made a mess. She defended me. I was embarrassed. Do you understand? Those are stupid mothers, you know. It's compassion mixed with attachment. Attachment is a disaster. So when compassion is powerful, it's strong and wise. Then you'll make the tough choices because it'll be for the benefit of the person. That's hard compassion to have because of our own attachment, you know. So okay, the essence of the first stages of practice, the problem is called attachment. So we're trying to conquer that by controlling our body, speech and mind. Subduing attachment. That's the name of the problem, if you like, in the first scope and second scope of practice, the wisdom wing. So the culmination of that, in terms of the long-term goal, is we get this first level of realization, which is called renunciation. That means you really now understand the delusions, and that means in particular you understand attachment, because that drives everything. So as Lama Zopa says, you've got renunciation when just the thought of another moment of attachment is so disgusting. It's like being in a septic tank. Or another time he said it's like using used toilet paper. Whatever, you know, works for your mind, okay? So, you know, attachment is our default mode. That's pretty intense. So now the next level of problem, the essence of the problem in the compassion wing, they refer to it as a sweet term in Tibetan called self-cherishing. It sounds very nice. We would say it's called selfishness. It's another way attachment works. It's another reference. Attachment puts me first all the time. Of course it does. And it's the source of our pain. But here they refer to the problem as self-cherishing, or putting self first, cherishing self. So what we're trying to do on the bodhisattva path is make this paradigm shift where it culminates in this outrageous state of mind called bodhicitta, where literally now others are first. Not just occasionally, not just your children, not just your pets, all sentient beings. So for me, you know, the Bodhisattva path, I find it so intense to talk about it, honestly. It sounds nice to say love and compassion, but when you hear the level of compassion that we can cultivate, it's quite outrageous, you know, and you'll see. I remember when I saw Lama Zopa last year, he said, "Do you teach about compassion?" I kind of blurted out, "No, it's too heavy for me, I can't cope." So I do my best to talk about it. Okay, so the first goal, like we did that prayer on the first day called the 3 principal aspects of the path. It's another way of framing this Lam Rim. And the first level, like I said, is junior school and high school, and that's renunciation. Recognizing 2 things. Renunciation means you've acknowledged that you are suffering and you're sick of it. But the bullseye is you now know the causes. Karma and delusions. That's the essence of renunciation. You're on the case here. You're sick of suffering. You're sick of your suffering. You're up to here with suffering, but you know the causes, and now you can start getting rid of suffering. That's renunciation. That's profound. Next level, we're now realizing, oh my God, everybody's in the same boat. How could I possibly not help them? Not possible. So here, again, the next level of realization is known as bodhicitta. That's the culmination of the next stages of practice in the compassion wing. So, like always, these, you know, in any body of knowledge, like in any, say, like when you study music, you know, you have all these different techniques that have been cultivated over the centuries, going back to Bach and beforehand. You have your different arpeggios and your scales and your this and your that, all your exercises that you do so that you can actually play the piano. Well, the same here, these techniques have been developed over the centuries, put together, cobbled together as a series of little different techniques. So over the centuries, going back to the great Indians, the great Nalanda masters, Shantideva, all these people, there's these techniques that have been developed, two of them that culminate in bodhicitta. One is known as the 6 causes and 1 effect, or the 7 cause something or other, 7 little techniques, and the other one is known as technically known as Lojong, which means mind training, something like that, or mind transformation. Pardon?
Exchanging self, right?
No, that's the Lojong is the broad name for the whole genre, and another way of calling it is exchanging self for others. A particular approach of it is where you're making this paradigm shift, and it's literally exchanging self for others, learning to put others first, and it's a more radical approach. So there's one approach that combines these two, and it ends up becoming 11 little techniques. The first few are from the first lot, the 6 causes, and the next lot are from the exchanging self for others approach. So let's just go through some of those 11 points. It's just this series of techniques that have been developed over the centuries by all the great yogis, and this is the favorite among the Tibetans. All the Tibetans love this Lojong approach, this exchanging self for others. It's the most radical way, the most advanced way, the most outrageous way of achieving this bodhicitta. So, okay, the starting point, the foundation practice in all of these techniques, the foundation practice, the starting point, the basis, is called simply the cultivation of equanimity. So that's taught in different ways in Buddhism. On the wisdom wing, you develop an equanimity that's the equanimity in your own mind, a steadiness, you're not up and down like a yo-yo, less bipolar in other words, you know. I always joke, but I don't joke. We're all bipolar. It's just a question of degree. We're all up and down like yo-yos, all berserk, all concentration berserk. We're all like that. It's just called attachment, you know. So when you begin to work on the wisdom wing and compassion, the wisdom wing, you've got more clarity, more reasonableness, less attachment, less aversion. You're more steady. You have more equanimity in yourself. And that's marvelous. Here, there's a different approach to equanimity. Here, what this equanimity is in relation to sentient beings. So what this equanimity is, when you've accomplished it, this is my words for it, is this heartfelt recognition that friends, enemies and strangers, and there's no fourth category on this planet, friends, enemies and strangers are equal to each other from one point of view. They equally want to be happy and they equally don't want to suffer. And so all we're trying to do in this, using logic to argue with ego's ridiculous misconceptions, is to prove that to ourselves, to the point where it becomes genuine, you know. And already this is profound. This is the first of the 11. And this becomes the basis for then developing the other stages. And it's a very powerful point to understand. So, okay, what is a friend? These broad terms. By definition, a friend for us is an object of attachment. In other words, one of our beloveds. Some people in our life, they're our beloveds. In other words, the object of our attachment is a person who appears lovely to us, whom we then have love and compassion for. So we do have love and compassion. We do have virtues, there's no question. But it's completely based on attachment. As we'd say, it's got strings attached. And as Lama puts it, it's unstable. The love and compassion we do have now for our beloveds is completely unstable because we want them to be happy, which is love, and we don't want them to suffer, which is compassion, because they do what my attachment wants. Now, it sounds very brutal, but if we look at our lives, this is absolutely true. So, in other words, it's got strings attached. Our friends are those whom we adore, and there's nothing wrong with that. We can have good to have friends, but when the attachment is there, that completely pollutes it. So our love and compassion is contingent upon their doing what my attachment wants. And as long as you do what my attachment wants, then I will want you to be happy and I will want you not to suffer, guaranteed. But when you stop doing what my attachment wants, my love and my compassion turn off like a tap. And you enter into the enemy category. We know this. I mean, enemies and friends go back and forth. Your beloved from one life, 1 year is the enemy of the next because he gives you up for a younger version. And the second that happens, your love and compassion cease immediately. It's obvious our love and compassion are contingent. It's obvious. It's a proof in our own lives. But we think it's normal. No one questions it. So what's an enemy? We don't use the word maybe, but that's the object of aversion. And who are they? They're people who don't do what my attachment wants, who do what my attachment doesn't want, who even hurt me. That's clear to one degree or another, and often they're with a friend. We know that. That's clear. So I do not have love and compassion for them. I struggle very much to even I struggle to even not want them to suffer. I'm hoping they suffer sometimes. We know that. And they're the ones that completely consume our lives. Enemies and friends, you know. And they change roles often. We know that. The third category, strangers, as we've discussed. 99.999% of the universe. And who are they for us? They're people who've neither harmed us nor helped us. So how do we feel about them? Couldn't care less. This is a fact. We don't question it. Okay, we do have some love and compassion. We read about foreign countries, people suffering. Of course we have compassion. We see that. But in general, they don't occupy our mind. Enemies and friends loom large in our mind. We know that. Strangers, and it's the vast majority of the universe. And what's our result? So we have attachment to one lot, aversion to the next lot, indifference to the next lot. So okay, these are the three toxic emotions, but there's a particular way of talking here. The three toxic emotions, three poisons, as Buddha calls them, you know, the summary, the essence, the summary of all these delusions that is identified in the mind, in his map of the mind. The root of these, as we know, is ego grasping, the primordial root delusion that clings to the I as inherent. That's the root delusion, but it has different manifestations, this ignorance. So in the first scope, we learn about the 10 non-virtues. I only mentioned the last three briefly. We've got 3 of the body, don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, 4 of the speech, and then 3 of the mind. He gets us to work on the mind at least, and he gets us in the very beginning stages to refrain from at least the grossest level. That's the way I put it. At least the grossest level of attachment, aversion, and ignorance. So the grossest level of attachment is really intense craving. We can see it. The nightmare of it is shocking. Overwhelmed by craving, deep dissatisfaction, and that's where you manifest as a junkie or jumping on 24 boys a day or whatever. You can't, or you're eating until you're 57, 500 kilos, or you kill yourself. Now I go ridiculous again. Go back to. I'll keep careful. I'll try and stay steady. The grosser level of craving, attachment is craving. We can see it. It's a nightmare. So suffering, so tormented. So at least refraining from that. This is first level of practice. Junior school. Then you've got the grosser level of anger, which is evident. You can't let go and you want the person to suffer. That's the worst one on the planet. That is beyond bearing. But the third one is interesting. The grosser level, a particular aspect of this ego grasping of ignorance is this particular ignorance of being very narrow-minded, very fundamentalist, very ignorant, really just a stupid person, very, very fundamentalist. I'm right and you're wrong. We can see that in our own lives. But you can certainly see it in terms of philosophies and religion. That's that first level. That's the really grosser level of ego grasping. So here, it seems to me, on the compassion wing, there's another grosser level of this ignorance is indifference. Uncaring. Couldn't care less. About whom? Strangers. Because these delusions run the universe. This is just seeing now these are seeing the sentient beings of the planet, or the world, the universe, through the lenses of the 3 delusions. So the ignorance one manifests in this way in relation to sentient beings as couldn't care less, completely couldn't care less. We have aversion, attachment, and couldn't care less, indifference. So what we're trying to do here with equanimity is shift the logic for why we want to love and have compassion for people. Right now, the logic for love and compassion is if you make me happy. So only a few people do we have compassion and love for, only a few. And they've got to be innocent victims as well. Very few, because the logic is ego grasping, and the logic is attachment, aversion, and then the ignorance. So we want to shift that and get to see logically that these 3 beings, seen through the lenses of my attachment, my aversion, and my indifference, they're really equal to each other. It's a really illogical lens to use to see other people. It's something made up by ego. I call people friend because they do what I want. I call people enemy because they don't do what I want. And I call people stranger if they do neither. That's completely self-centered. We should be embarrassed to admit that's how we see the world, but the entire universe is the same because we're all in samsara. Monkeys, dogs, ants are exactly the same because we've got the three delusions, the three poisons. So we're trying to shift that, get to see how it's irrational. So this is already profound, you know. So you've got to use logical arguments to argue with ego's ridiculous misconceptions. So one of the obvious logics is that one person could be in those three categories at different points in my life. So when like say, you know, Chuck's a stranger, I use the example. Let's say Chuck, and I hear, you know, let's say Churdren's his friend, and Churdren tells me he gets terrible migraines. And I'm listening to Churdren. Oh yeah, the poor guy, does he really? But it lasts about a half a second. I'll pass the tea, please. I couldn't care less, he's a stranger. How do you know the guy? Then I meet him and fall in love and he moves me in. Now I've got such love and compassion, you can't believe it. Oh, Robina's so compassionate. She spends her money on Chuck. She stays up all night with him. She tries to fix him. She's so loving. So why should I? What's the difference? Before I couldn't care less. Now he's my friend. I'll do anything for him. But his headaches were exactly the same when he was my stranger. He wanted to be happy and not suffer exactly the same as a stranger as he does right now as my friend. But because I see him differently, because now it's personal. How self-centered can you get? And then he chucks me out and moves Children in, and now he's my enemy. And I hope he suffers with his migraines. We know this. We're all like this. So the point is, friend, enemy and stranger are exactly the same as each other. So you ask Chuck when he's my stranger, how are your headaches? He'll say they're terrible. You ask him when he's my beloved, how are his headaches? He'll say they're terrible. You ask him when he's my enemy, how are his headaches? He'll say they're terrible. In other words, from Chuck's point of view, there's not a fraction of difference. So enemy, friend, stranger, there's not a fraction of difference from that point of view. Yeah, he might be a monster. There might be a psycho out there. This is not the issue here. So when we say, may you be happy, it's got to be that you've got to be a nice person and you've got to deserve my happiness, baby. You've got to deserve my love. So when you say, well, Chuck wants to be happy and he's just chucked me out, what do you mean he wants to be happy? He doesn't deserve it, we'll say. So that's why when he's my friend, he deserves my love because he's been kind to me. It shows how selfish we are. It shows how self-centered we are. I mean, we should be embarrassed. But it's the normal world. No one questions it. So the point we're trying to prove is friend, enemy, stranger are equal to each other from this one point of view. They want to be happy all the time and they don't want to suffer. That's it. But it's hard to hear it. We've got to get past all our misconceptions. And what do you mean they want to be happy? They don't deserve it, we'll say. It's not the point here. It's not the issue here. It's not a question whether they're saints or sinners. That's not the issue. The python wants to be happy. He might want to eat you, but he wants to be happy just like, you know, Mother Teresa wants to be happy. Hitler wants to be happy. Doesn't matter whether they're good or bad. That's not the issue here. It's getting ourselves out of the equation, in other words. So there's many ways you can argue. That's one example. Or another example, even more simple, is yourself. Just reverse it now. Think of three people right now. Look to the left and see a beloved. And look how they're looking at you. They think you're divine. They adore you, don't they? This friend of yours. They look at you like you're some angel. They see friend. Now have a person who doesn't like you right now, your ex-husband. Look how they're looking at you. They see a mean person, don't they? And then look at a stranger, a person you know just enough, they're looking at you, they're so bored, they can't even look at you. You get my point? Now, if they each wrote a description of you, you wouldn't recognize the same person, would you? Because each of them sees you through the lenses of their needs. One sees you through the lens of their attachment because you're gorgeous and nice to them, they think you're divine. You don't do what the other person wants, they think you're ugly. And you do neither for the third person, they couldn't care about you. But look at yourself. You know at each point they're looking at you, you're not different. You don't feel 1 minute I'm a friend, next minute you don't think I'm an enemy. You don't think like that. I'm just me, and I want to be happy every second, and I don't want to suffer every second. That's the same logic, you know. So we've got to get ourselves out of the equation in this one. Our mothers would say, put yourself in another person's shoes. It's very interesting. But here this is not love and compassion yet. This is very precise, and these different techniques are each quite precise issues. I mean, it's very precise attitudes. It's very technical, really. We all get very wishy-washy when it comes to love and compassion, you know. But these are 11 distinct, different, precise attitudes that we have to cultivate. So equanimity is a very precise attitude, an attitude that says enemy, friend, stranger are equal to each other from the point of view of wanting to be happy and not wanting to suffer. That's the point, no more than that. Love and compassion come about 10 points later, well, 8 or something. But this is the basis for changing and gradually growing towards wanting to have love and compassion for all of them. What's the logic now? Because they want to be happy. They don't want to suffer. So we have to prove that point first. And then you grow on that foundation. And it includes everybody. That's the point. It's not personal. It's quite tough. It's hard to do. And how do you apply this every day? Not easy, but we can do it every day. You don't just do this stuff on your cushion, you know. So let's say you've got a child and you adore your child. Of course you do. And that child's got a friend and you can't stand this friend. They're mean, they pick their nose, they're ugly. So all you do is love your friend and your beloved child, and you can't stand this other kid. All you got to do is say to yourself, they're equal. They both want to be happy in exactly the same way. From their point of view, they are equal. That's quite profound, you know. Maybe the other kid's a mean kid, you've got to watch them. But they want to be happy. They don't want to suffer, just like your beloved. There's not a fraction of difference. So it really gives you some wisdom, you know. Still be wise, still keep if the kid's mean, you be careful. But it's forcing ourselves to look into that person and know they're just like each other. That's really hard. That's intense. We can do it every second, you know. Because all we do is see friend, enemy and stranger. There is no other category on this planet for any one of us. Think about it. Because we see everybody through this lens of our three delusions: attachment, aversion, ignorance. And it's utterly I-based, utterly self-centered. We really should be embarrassed how we see the world, but that's normal. The world does it. Nothing special. So this is already profound. That's the first point. Now the next point is hilarious. You need your calculator for this one. In this series of techniques. It goes like this. The thing we're trying to contemplate is, all beings have been my mum. We think, oh my God, what am I supposed to do with that, you know? So that's just to prove a point that there are beginningless minds. We must have bumped into each other beginningless time, and they've been our mums since beginningless time. Because the third point is the point we're getting at, and this is a tough one for us. The mother is kind. So we don't think that in our culture. We think it's the opposite. So as His Holiness says, when you don't like to think about your mother, think of anybody who's just nurtured you, who's taken care of you. That's the point of it. A mother's simply an example of a person who's taken care of you and loved you and looked after you. And I think anyway, this third point, anyway, is a really excellent point to think about, especially if we don't like our mums, you know. So there's 2 points here, 3A and 3B. And 3A goes, my mother is kind, the mother is kind. So the logic being from the previous point, if all beings have been my mum, and you'd use one example of one mother, then the logical deduction is they've all been my mother, so they've all been kind to me. And they say that's a very genuine realization. They talk about mother sentient beings, you know. So when you really realize this, and like the yogis, they just see an ant and they go, oh, mother sentient being. They know they've been their mum countless times. It's a very funny example, but it's a very profound one. And all it is a technique to shift your mind. That's all it is. It's just a technique to shift your mind, to see people differently. So the mother is kind, I think, is a great thing to think about. So let's look at it. First of all, let's look at the word kind. My sense is, what we mean when a person's kind is they did what I wanted. So of course you're kind. If I go and order cake and you give me an extra piece with cream on the top and a discount, of course I'll say you're kind, because you gave me what I wanted. Even if you think even if you talk about me behind my back, this fat old Buddhist nun, she's so stupid, look at her. I don't care. I get what I want, so I'm calling you kind. So it's a very selfish view of kindness, you know, if you do what I want. Here, and it's hard for us to hear this, the point of kind isn't that the person is in themselves the kind person. That's not the point. That's not the issue at all. Your mother might be a selfish person. She might be really mean, unhappy, selfish person. There's no doubt. But that's not the issue here. That's not the issue. The issue is to try and observe that anything your mother's done, mother's an example. Okay, part of our big problem, we see everybody through the lens of attachment. So if our mother's been mean to us, which means she hasn't fulfilled our attachment, then then that exaggerates her bad qualities. So then we have aversion for her. And we all know that these delusions exaggerate. So I remember when I was a kid, I was like in love with my mother. I thought my mother was perfect. You do when you're little. And then I remember when I was maybe, I don't know how old I was, and she started to fall off the pedestal. It was shocking to me. I remember the moment, it was the first time I ever found fault in my mother. I was shocked. It was like the worst sin in the world. I was shocked at myself. But it was downhill from there. Once you start, then you go down. And by the time you're 16, you think she's an evil monster. So all you remember is the bad things. That's what the delusions do. So one way of saying it is we're trying to conquer that here and remember consciously. It's such a powerful exercise. Even if your mother has been mean, even if she is horrible, I'm sure she was. She's like you and me, she's in samsara. Then it's really powerful to think of the good things she has done. And that means you're painting a new picture of that mother. You're getting past the angry picture, because anger only remembers her bad things. Attachment only remembers her good things. Well, here we're trying to be reasonable and remember some of her good things. It's a very powerful exercise to do, very humbling. And suddenly, before you know it, you have affection again for your mother. That's just one person, the mother, you know. It's profound, I think. Even if your mother's given you away. I think the one logic on the planet is that your mother did nothing, she gave you away. Well, I'm sorry, she didn't abort you. You should be crying with compassion and gratitude every day of your life your mother decided not to kill you. It's a fact. You're still alive. It's a proof. Yes, she gave you away. She didn't abort you. She carried you for 9 months. That's a fact. That's enough reason to never stop being grateful to your mother. I mean, one of my sisters, several of us had abortions. And this other sister, she wouldn't have one. She was 17 in the 60s. We said, oh, it's easy. Come on, have an abortion, have an abortion. She wouldn't do it. And she gave this child away. Then she broke her heart for 25 years. She was broken-hearted. And then she even met her in the 80s and the kid rejected her again. She just suffered enormously. And I bet that daughter never once thinks that her mother, my sister, consciously decided not to abort her. If she thought that, she would be weeping in gratitude to her sister, to my sister. Do you understand my point? But you never think that. You're oh, she gave me away. I'll never forget that example. So powerful. So the second one, 3B, is said to be more powerful, logic. Initially it sounds ridiculous. All sentient beings are kind. I mean, like, what a joke. What's it mean? And it's scientifically true if we take this view. Listen to it. That means, and this is my words for it, that since we are conceived, you think about it, there's not a single thing that has facilitated our life that is not the handiwork that includes even the life and death of countless sentient beings. This is dependent arising in relation to sentient beings. It is fact, it is scientific truth. You take anything that you've got, my glasses, once I start thinking of the number of beings involved in me having glasses so I can see nothing without them. The number of beings involved. Of course they're not thinking about me. We think a person's kind when they're thinking of me. I mean, the guy who designed my thin lenses, my thin lenses are so amazing, they're so expensive, but when I was little, I had glass so thick they were like my nose would fall off, you know, because I'm really cross-eyed and I'm very long-sighted. Now these clever kind people invented very thin material. So I've now got 11 plus down here, but it's thin, you know. I'm so grateful. He could have been a pedophile who designed it. That's not the issue here. How amazing that I can now see and have lightweight glasses on my poor nose, you know. That's a fact. People did it. We don't care because they didn't do it for us. So the point here again is they're not in their bones kind, good people. That's not the issue. It's the fact that they did it that is the miracle that's facilitated my ability to see. It's a fact. You can't argue with that. The point is they're not thinking of me. That's the one we think about. That's not the issue here. Their kindness is the fact that they did it, that I got the benefit so I can see, I can live in my life. Everything we have, my clothing, my socks, everything that you've got in your life, everything up to now is the handiwork of countless sentient beings. Look at the food we eat. That's why eating meat or not eating meat almost is hardly an issue. Look at the vegetables, the millions of beings who die, who tortured, suffer to get our veggies, you know. That's sentient beings. They didn't think of us. This is dependent arising, but sentient beings. It's very powerful if we think of it. But we normally don't think of it. Why? Because we see everything through the lenses of our needs being fulfilled. If they fulfill my needs, I'm prepared to thank them. Especially if I like it, you know. Or if they did it especially for me. So when you got this, you know, they say there's one bodhisattva, every time he saw anything, he'd burst into tears. He was called always crying one. Because whatever he saw the handiwork of sentient beings, you know. It's like your mother. My mother, she had 7 babies. Well, she had 8 actually, but one died. She kept everything we ever did. I mean, mothers do that, don't they? Every lock of hair, every pair of shoes, every drawing, every letter. I mean, because that's the thing, the point I'm getting at. My mother, when she saw a little drawing her little Bubsy did, it was a stupid drawing, it was ridiculous. But she would weep because it's her Bubsy. All she saw was her Bubsy. That's what mothers do, and that's what we're talking here. Every time you see that cake, even if it's a bad cake, you think of the people who made it, the real human beings like you, me, who made the cake, who put the thing, who fixed the thing, who did the recipe, who packed it, who sold it, who cooked it, the person who made the stove, the gas that made the stove work so you could have the cake. They're all people, you know. They're all human beings. And the animals who died. This is truth. This is scientific truth. But we don't care if they're not our beloveds. If our beloved does something for us, we'll never forget it. We'll be so grateful. That's only because we're attached to them. But this is fact. It's very powerful, this argument. Very powerful. But we never think about it. We'll hear it now and hear it, but the next second we go back to the default mode of getting what I want, self-cherishing, you know. And again, being kind doesn't mean that in their bones they're kind. They could have been a pedophile, like I said. That's not the issue here. It's the fact that they did it. This is fact. You can't argue with it. This is scientific truth. We never think this way. That's very powerful for the mind. In other words, we're learning to see things differently. The whole point of all of these techniques is to chip away at self-cherishing so we can begin to see other beings, you know. Step by step, you know. The fourth one is conclusion. I must repay their kindness. Like we've been doing for our lunch meditations, you know. When this becomes real for us, stable, not as occasionally, but stable realization, it's profound. Then the conclusion is, I must repay their kindness. And what does that mean? I keep working on myself to become a Buddha. That's the repaying the kindness. So the next series of techniques are the Lojong techniques. So what I want to do here is use one of these classic texts from this tradition. It's going back to a person in Tibet called Langri Tangpa, who was a disciple of Dom Tompa, who was a disciple of Atisha, who brought all these practices from his own great guru in Sumatra called Selingpa. He spent 13 years with him, and then from the Nalanda tradition, this big monastery in India, where all the great yogis and scholars and Mahayana great beings whose works that are the ones that are the basis of all the studies of the philosophy and everything in Tibet. So this text is called the 8 Verses. Normally they have very poetic titles. This is about the most boring title you could get. The 8 Verses of Mind Training. So let's go through these verses. And these are so shocking, I almost can't say them. Every time I say them, I get more shocked. And you'll hear what I'm saying. But because it's religion and it's poetry, we read it and go all la-di-da, you know. But here the meaning, it is so outrageous. These teachings, known as Lojong, coming from Atisha, exchanging yourself for others, were kept secret in the beginning. They're so shocking. You'll hear. So the first verse says something like this. In order to get the benefit from all sentient beings who are more precious to me than a wish-fulfilling jewel. Well, forget a stupid old wish-fulfilling jewel. Let's just put the word $1 million. Or in order to get the benefit from all sentient beings who are more precious for me than $1 million. So even analyze those words, they're ridiculous. I mean, that's just, what the hell is this person saying? What does this mean, you know? Who are more precious to me than $1 million? Excuse me? What's it mean? What it means is, this is why it's so weird. What it means is, and that's why even the first line, who are more, to get the benefit from all sentient beings. So that's the analogy I use of, let's say you're the best doctor on the planet. You're the best herbalist. You can cure any disease, let's say. And you have compassion, but you want to continue to grow your compassion. You want to get better and better and better at healing people because you can't bear their suffering. That's this attitude. So herbalist, bodhisattva, either way, whatever word you like. So for you, you know, in order to take advantage, to get the benefit from all these suffering people who are more precious to me than $1 million. Because if I didn't have people who were sick, how could I grow my skill as a herbalist? How could I continue to heal people? How could I become a better doctor? I couldn't. I need suffering sentient beings who are more precious to me than $1 million, because then I can, on the basis of them, I can grow and become a Buddha, so I can help every single one of them. That's the logic. I mean, who has that level of compassion? It's ridiculous. It's so intense. Are you communicating? Yeah. That's the first verse. They get worse as they go. The next one, I always say this and I mean it, if you were a therapist and you gave this piece of advice to somebody could sue you for abuse. I promise you. The next verse goes like this. When I am with others, I will see myself as the lowest of all. And not only that, I will see everyone else as supreme. Pamonka Rinpoche says these teachings, in order to practice them, you need to be a suitable vessel. So what that means is, if you're a normal, ordinary victim person who hasn't practiced, who thinks you're full of self-pity like the rest of us, the victim mode, before we start to practice, who believes that other people have to make you happy, who believes that other people harm you, who blames everybody else, low self-esteem, hates yourself, normal person, this is outrageous advice and you would not give it. This is shocking. We can't possibly hear it. We'd say, well, excuse me, mate, I already hate myself. What do you want me to do with this? We cannot hear it properly. So what does it mean to try and even hear the logical meaning of it? We've got to be a suitable vessel. That means we've got to do some wisdom work. We've got to have done some wisdom wing work, have some understanding of karma, understanding of attachment, understanding of low self-esteem, understanding of ego, and have healed ourselves to some degree. Then we have the courage to hear this properly. Otherwise it's too insane. So what does it mean in the right way? How would you practice this? Well, I think, it says all sentient beings. That's too outrageous. That's obviously very high. So we can do it one at a time. And my feeling is the way to practice this genuinely, in a sincere way, you got one person, let's say a colleague at work. Nothing special, just a colleague. The way to practice this is to think of something that they can do better than you. One particular thing. That's a perfect practice of it. Because normally, the way we are, even if we're nice people, even if we like each other, we're always finding fault, always criticizing. Even our best friends, we're going to find fault. There's no way we won't do that. The ego naturally puts me first, naturally puts me up, even if we've got low self-esteem. When you've got low self-esteem, it's like flip side of pride. You're kind of furious that other people dare to be better than you. That's what it is. It's really arrogant. Low self-esteem is so arrogant. So here is this incredible humility, this joyful delight in actually seeing that Mary has prettier ears than me. It's something as simple as that. I mean it. She's better at computers than me. Maybe she can, she's got anything, a small thing about one person that you actually see that she is better, she is supreme, she's superior to you in that. That you are lower than her. Okay, these words are heavy for our mind, but get the meaning of it, It's profound practice. The point of all these verses is the courageous attitude of a person who has done the wisdom work and who wants to do everything in their power to smash the ego grasping and the self-cherishing, which are the obstacles to you helping others. They're the things holding you back. And because you want to grow this profound compassion, you want to help people so badly, and even speaking that way is so weird. When you hear Lama Zopa talk, I can't even always cope. He talks about this unbearable compassion. They say someone like him, for Roger, his attendant, his main attendant, as he said about Rinpoche, he says, for Rinpoche, sleep is a disgusting waste of time. These yogis, who, like Geshe Langri, can sleep in the mountains with no food, they sound like blissful beings. They are. The real thing that compels them is their compassion. This is hard to hear. We can't conceive of such level of compassion. We can't. For our child, maybe. One person, maybe. But all beings, this is too demented, It's too high. It's too extreme for us. But it's real. This stuff's real. So all we can do is aspire to it, imagine it, Not some holy feeling, but it's a genuine attitude that Buddha says we're capable of. Right now we do see ourselves as the lowest of all, because we've got low self-esteem, which means we have pride, we have arrogance, we have self-centeredness. It's hard to hear these things, but we should be sad for ourselves because that's what's causing us suffering. We shouldn't beat ourselves up. This is why we're suffering. When we have that first level, renunciation is like compassion for yourself, then this view is easier when we understand renunciation. Which means you must have a lot of wisdom to do this, you know, so much wisdom. The next verse says, the moment you see a delusion arise in your mind which will cause you and others problems, you will avert it immediately. Which sort of seems very odd, really. Suddenly pops in the middle of these verses. But it's an interesting assumption. The moment a delusion arises, you'll avert it immediately. I mean, that's bizarre because for us, delusion is a default mode. So all that means is if you notice your mind before it becomes a full-blown emotion, grab it, catch it, and avert it. That's the real job of working on your mind. But this is a higher level of it every second of the day, you know. The next 3 verses are very shocking, and each gets worse than the other. And we can relate to this. The first one seems to me it's about just in general seeing in the world people who are not very connected to. And it says, when you see evil people, now what is it, something like people who are, what's the words they use? Evil in nature, which is very kind of, who talks like that? Maybe where do we say psychopaths? When you hear, they say, when you hear about psychopaths who are rare, it says rare. Maybe in 11th century Tibet they were rare. I'm sorry. In our world they're the default mode. Maniacs, we hear about maniacs all the time. Really demented, suffering people, full of suffering, who do terrible harm. When we hear about them, we will see them. We'll see that rare person as someone really precious. I forget the exact words now. I should get the right words. We'll hold that person as precious and dear. Again, what's the logic? Remember, the point in these verses, there's one point. The single goal of these verses is to help us smash self-cherishing, smash the delusions that cause me to be separate from others. That's the purpose of all these verses. So every time you hear about a maniac, and then the first one is aversion, how disgusting, how they dare, this pedophile, this evil person, then we see them as, they're not so rare now, but they're precious, something precious for me to hold. Why? Because my mind has to see their suffering. Therefore, as soon as I see their suffering, and the suffering they're causing to themselves and others, it'll cause me to have such compassion for them. The next verse gets closer to home. And my sense is this is like in your broader family, in your work. When you're accused, basically when you're accused of something you didn't do, you'll take the blame and offer the victory to the other. That's too shocking for words. And this is our life. We always have somebody in our life who doesn't like us, who criticizes, who blames us. And even when we can't even take responsibility for something we did do wrong. This is when you didn't do anything wrong. This is like demented, you know. There's no logic in this for us. Again, you've got to be a suitable vessel to do this. You've got to be courageous to do this. This is a huge practice. This is unbelievable practice. Shocking practice. To happily, yes, you're right, and I'm so sorry, and, you know, I'm the mistake. I made the mistake. This is too shocking.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
How does that benefit that?
That's not the point here. Sorry, I'm sorry, excuse me. See, this is what, I'm not shouting at you even a second. I understand your question, but what we've got to realize, these teachings are like, they're sort of like, we're not used to thinking of these things as technical, but this is a certain high level of practice for a high level being, if you can, and it's very specific. Each verse is a really specific approach, and that's me trying to cultivate my mind to get rid of my self-cherishing. It's got zero to do with the other person. In a sense, it's got nothing to do with the other person. Do you get my point? Yeah. It's got nothing to do with them at all. That's another practice. So that might be, for definitely the wisest thing might be to say exactly the opposite, but that's another practice. Here it's really specific. Do you understand? Yeah. But if we misinterpret it, we think I've got to go around taking the blame every time and be like a doormat. That's ridiculous. Not like that at all. And also, it depends on the context. Like if it's your child, you do not take the blame. You demand they take responsibility. That's a different role. You get my point? Yeah. There's different practices at different times. They're all different tools in your toolkit. You understand? Yeah. The next one is even worse, the most painful. And this for me is like your child or your beloved, a person whom you've given your life to, and they go against you and do you terrible harm. I will see that person as my precious guru. Pooh, this is too much, this stuff, you know. They were kept secret, these verses. Sounds so peculiar, doesn't it? So we do our best. Practice once a month. Try it once a year. You understand? Give it a go, you know, every now and again. Whew. That one of blaming, taking the blame, I love that. I have this story I always tell, you know. So a Buddhist in Sydney had a party or something, some friends, and I forget the guy's name, John. And he was telling everybody, and some of my friends were there, and he was telling everybody how his brand new BMW had got scratched right along the door. So he bought a new door, he fixed it, then it got scratched again. And discovered this wacko guy next door did it. He had no idea why, but obviously this old guy thinks John's done something terrible. And he said, what will you do? So, you know, oh, well, scratch his car, sue him. And then George, our friend George, said, I'll tell you what Lamazopa would do. He would find out what this old guy liked. He'd buy a beautiful gift. So he found out that he liked golf. So he bought him these fancy golf balls, wrapped them beautifully, went to his back door, knocked on the door, and offered him the gift and asked him to forgive him for anything he'd done wrong. He'd done nothing wrong. He loved this idea. He did it. It was amazing. So, and then anyway, John was in the kitchen having a cup of tea, feeling he'd solved the problem. He felt very good about this. And then the old guy comes in, beaming from ear to ear with his gift unwrapped, saying, this is the kindest thing anyone has done for me. Thank you so much. Everything is forgiven, he said. Isn't that an amazing story? I mean, that you've got to be so brave. You read about these people, you know, I always read about, like I read Vanity Fair, this American magazine, there's always these stories about these rich people, mega rich people, who 37 years ago, when the next door neighbours and one guy's trash can was an inch over the wrong side of the place, you know, and then 27 years later they're spending millions of dollars on court cases, like in a war with each other. That's how we go normally, you know. And then now they're beyond the point of ever letting go of it. Ever. They'll never let go till the day they die. So that's to be mortal enemies. I mean, this is just an amazing story. I love it, you know. I mean, the bonus was the guy forgave him. I mean, the fact that he just accepted to do it and apologise. It's very intense, that. That just seems opposite to what we think is normal. That's weird in our world. That's like deluded, ridiculous, strange behaviour, you know. But the point of these verses, there's one point, to do everything in our power to take the worst experiences of our life, to use it as a weapon to smash our ego grasping, our self-cherishing. So why? So we can become a bodhisattva, so we can help the mother sentient beings. And it's logical. You know, there's another whole approach to this. It's called transforming problems into happiness. Another whole approach. It's all in the same area. Meaning, when you're that advanced and you're brave enough, you can use, this is all this is, a bad situation, which is normally what causes anger and despair, to use it to see it differently. And that's also proving emptiness. We have to learn to like problems like we like ice cream, as Lama Zopa says. This is intense. It's forcing us to reinterpret. It's forcing us to reassess our assumptions, you know. Because the logic of ego is, when bad things happen, you get angry. When good things happen, you get happy. But here we're trying to see the opposite. We're trying to see a bad thing as good. Why would we want to do that? Because we're trying to smash ego grasping. It's very logical. And anyway, things don't have an inherent nature, so it's also reinforcing our view of emptiness. That's why I tell that story, always tell that story about this woman in prison. I didn't know her. I read about her since as well. She's out of prison now. In the 70s in Florida, she was hitching with a hippie, like complete hippies. Hippie husband, hippie kids, hitching. Somehow, and they got picked up, 2 guys. I can't remember the whole details. And the police stopped them, and the 2 guys killed the police and blamed the hippies. Well, they're on death row in Florida. Completely innocent hippies, you know. This nightmare for 17 years for her. Her husband even got executed. I mean, you can't even imagine that pain. Executed, you know. Even her children were given to her parents. Her parents died in a car accident, so she lost the kids, given to the, you know, the orphanage system, whatever they call it. Like, you can't conceive of the nightmare for this person, this woman. And over the year, I think she did yoga and things. And then at some point, I remember reading her memoir briefly. And she said, at some point, I realized I could not change anything. But they couldn't take my mind from me. So I decided, I'm not a prisoner. I'm a monk. I'm not in a cell. I'm in a cave. I mean, that's just so stupendous, you can't believe it. So in one way, we'd think that's just insane, this demented woman, you know. But the interesting point was this. It's not as if she sat back and didn't try to get her freedom. She never stopped for 17 years to get her freedom, and she got it eventually. But she could see, I find there's such intelligence, you know, she could see there was no benefit to her of going crazy. There was no benefit to her of being angry and resentful. And our world thinks she has every reason to be, because that's so shocking what happened. But she could see, she knew, she had this amazing emotional intelligence, it seems to me. And that means she didn't have much anger. That she could see, that she could change her way of seeing things. And conclusion, she'd remain happy. And she never stopped working on her freedom. That's proving, this is exactly a perfect example. I couldn't get a better example of this level of practice. But look how hard. I mean, look at our situations. The things that have happened to us. Yes, everyone has a person who harms us. We've all been harmed unfairly. There's no question, from this life point of view. Every single one of us. And Buddha says, he's very practical. He says, if you can change something, please change it. But what if you can't? That's when the work starts. That's what's so powerful. And it needs immense courage. I mean, look at the torment she must have gone through to get to that point. In the beginning, when you're arrested, you just can't believe that no one's going to believe you. You just know perfectly well they're going to find out in 1 minute you're innocent. But they don't. It keeps going. It goes mad. You get worse and worse. The kids get taken away. The parents get killed. The husband gets executed. You go completely out of your brain. And now I've read after she got out after 17 years. And now she's living in Ireland. She went to Ireland for some Amnesty International event. And then she met this Irish fellow who'd also been accused of murdering some British policemen during all the Troubles. So they fell in love and got married. Now they're both now 80 and fat and white-haired and pink. I saw a lovely photo of them. And they come to America sometimes, and they run a retreat centre in Cork, near Cork, for people who've been released from prison who've been wrongly accused. The dearest people in the whole world. You're so touched by it, you know. That's an example. I mean, look how profound that is. Look at our small examples of when we're wrongly accused. We nearly go mad. When people are mean to us. When people, I mean, you think about it. Some people who come to me, who've children who've rejected them after 30 years. It's unbearable. I can't imagine the pain of it. Children give up their parents, you know. A person you've given your life to for 30 years, you come home and there's a note, I've left you. I mean, I can't imagine the pain. To have that level of clarity, that level of courage is unbelievable. Unbelievable. Hello. Welcome. Come on in. We're here for 5 days having a retreat, enjoying the cold weather. We're supposed to come out here in the mornings for the sun, but it didn't come out this morning. So we're all in our woolies again. You going to stay for lunch? Would you like to stay for lunch?
Just go Sunday.
You don't want to stay for lunch? No? Okay. Do you want to come into the cave? Come in here. This is the Lawudo Lama's cave, which is what was first here. From the past life, and Lama Zopa's in this. So just walk through, darling. Come on in. Yeah, it's a good idea. Just come on. We'll keep chatting. You just please come in. Please have a look. So what time? It's lunchtime, isn't it, anyway? What time is it? 11? Huh?
10:56.
Oh, we've got to go. Okay. So any questions before we finish? Then we'll have some lunch. So any questions about this outrageous view of practice? Any questions?
I'd like to know about the bodhisattva vows.
Yeah, we'll go into that. I'll go into that. We'll go into that later. We'll do that. All right, I'll do that. What else, people?
We'll
Yes.
for 7 and 8.
What, darling?
You were at number 6.
Yeah, I know. There's 2 more. That's right. I'll go to those later. Yeah, go on.
Just the topic of being wrongly accused.
Yes,
I spoke to you
yes,
about the other
yes,
day.
yes, exactly.
What you're saying is basically just accept it.
It's not just basically, it's all a question, you know, that's why we were talking. It's a question of what's, sometimes it might be to do something for the sake of the other person. But you might see that it's not beneficial. It's up to the situation and the time, what's useful, but this is really a technique for you. So even in your own mind, you don't have to say the other person. Even your own mind is the practice. No one has to know. You don't go out and go there, oh, I'll take the blame. No, it doesn't even have to be spoken, like in your situation. It's in your own mind. And then when you understand karma, then you know why it's happening. Something from the past. So then you really take responsibility for it and realize if I hadn't done that in the past, she wouldn't be doing this to me now. So you really own it strongly. Do you understand? And truly give the blame, truly give the victory. I mean, the victory. Truly see that she's the one who's suffering. And it's completely private. No one has to know about it. That's the real point. Absolutely. Like that woman, this is the point about that woman. I remember reading at the same time about some fellow on death row, same as her on death row, also innocent, and he would be what we consider normal. He went completely out of his brain, screaming every day, I did not rape and kill that woman. He went totally mad. We think that's normal and we think that's justified. So the point is this. If you look at both of them, both innocent, they were both right, they didn't do it. But look at the woman, she became sane, clear, and even was able to help others. He just went mad. So what's, you know, who's the beneficiary of that? But we think it's justified, you know, and then we want to blame the mean people. Oh, he's allowed to be angry. We say, I'm allowed to be angry. I mean, that's like saying you're allowed to stab yourself. Of course you are. But who would want to do that? That's ridiculous. So you can see the advantage, but so courageous. So when you realize it's got nothing to do with the other, this has nothing to do with the other person, it's about you. When you realize that, she has to never know, you know. That woman, the people, the courts, the police, they couldn't care less. It was her practice. When you realize that you are the beneficiary, then who wouldn't want to do it? But we get all this idea of justified and how dare, and I have the right to do this and the right, how dare they do that? This is kind of, that's what destroys us, you know. We've got to be a suitable vessel. You've got to have done some practice first. And if you're not capable of this, you don't go there. Bye-bye. Enjoy the walk. Yeah. Do you understand, people? Yeah, go.
This isn't really a question, but I tried 1 week and I put these 8 verses on my clipboard at work.
Wow, amazing.
And
helped?
Yeah.
Unbelievable. How courageous of you.
Doctors and
Ah!
grouchy doctors. And, now it's on there every.
Unbelievable. So courageous.
Not saying it.
No, but it's a remind.
Well,
There you go. Amazing, 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 amazing. I know. So we'll go. The next one is actually this is where this technique known as Tong Len, which is the key technique, which is like the 9th point of these 11. This is where Tong Len kicks in, giving and taking, and I think this is the evolution of that technique. This next verse, which we'll talk about later, it says that, you know, I will secretly I will secretly take upon myself everybody else's suffering and give them all my happiness. It's giving and taking, it's called. And for some reason people in the West love this technique. I don't know why, it's so outrageous. So we'll talk about it later. And then the final one is about understanding emptiness, understanding everything is illusory, something like that. We'll discuss those later. Okay, people? So again, let's think of lunch differently. See it as the handiwork of sentient beings. The millions of creatures have died, or people who've cooked it, people who've made people who've made the gas, people who've made the stove, people who've made the chimney, people who've made the building. You just never end. If you start thinking, all these sentient beings, but for all their bits and pieces of all this work done interdependently, we wouldn't have lunch. We don't have to do anything except give them a few dollars. How incredible. So we'll enjoy this lunch and want to repay their kindness by continuing to work on ourselves so we can never stop helping other sentient beings. Jangtrup Semtog Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ke Guchi, Ke Pa Nyampa Me Pa Yang Gong Ne Gondu Pebasho, Gewa Di, Nudo Dag, Lama Sange Drug Yune. There it is, whatever, I forgot it. Thank you so much. Okay.